well, welcome. I'm Yvonne Schwab, ACG Silicon Valley CEO. Thank you for joining us today. I personally can't wait to hear our experts dig deep into what they believe the impacts of AI on society are. So just a few words to our organization. We are the leading business-to-business networking organization in Silicon Valley, providing connections, thought leadership, and enabling personal and organizational growth with 8 different circles focused on different industries and interests. ACGSV offers an array of networking opportunities, and with over 14,000 members in 59 chapters across the world, ACG provides local connections with a global reach. We have our next e-lunch with the ACG California chapters next Wednesday on 5/25. Then on May 26, our partner Invest in Bavaria is hosting the Young Executive Circle incorporated into their annual MyFest. This year, they will be covering the supply chain. So check in on that. On June 2nd, our ACGSV C Circle is hosting their first in-person discussion at BNY Mellon in Menlo Park. On June 6th, we have our public board circle meeting, and on June 9th, our female executive leaders circle will meet. Stay tuned for more details on that. We invite you to visit our website at acgsv.org to see the full calendar of what we have in store for you. Now for today's event, let me introduce you to our moderator today, Lena Maria Ludwig. I said that really German. Lena is the project manager for international investment and expansion at the Bavarian US Offices for Economic Development. Lena's passion and expertise in economics, cultures, and new technologies has enabled her to be a bridge for startup investment and expansion across the Atlantic in emerging fields such as healthcare or digital health, smart cities, and AI. In a past life, she told me, she has also been involved in German media as a reporter and moderator. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Lena to get us started.
Thank you, Yvonne. Beautiful pronunciation of my name. So as you know, I am your moderator today. And, without further ado, I also want to introduce you to our panelists. We have an amazing array of people here. Let's start with Ashley. Everybody will talk for about a few minutes about themselves.
Hi, Ashley Tarver here with Microsoft. I'm a data and AI evangelist working at Microsoft and helping the organization get details and information out about how the technology can be used and implemented within our businesses, and eager to have been involved with ACG for many, many years and excited to be on the panel to talk about this topic. Thanks, Lena.
Sure. Irina, why don't you go next?
Hi, everybody. My name is Irina Raiku, and I'm the director of the Internet Ethics Program at the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. I'm an attorney by training. I'm a certified information privacy professional, and has part of the Partnership on AI, which is a consortium of companies and civil society groups working together on AI issues for several years now, and I'm part of the working group on fair, transparent, accountable AI.
Great, thanks, Irina. Keith, would you like to go next?
Hi, sure. Good to be here. It's a real honor. Thanks for inviting me. So I'm the Vice President of Worldwide AI Initiatives for NVIDIA. I oversee our global portfolio with government, so interface with all foreign governments, and it's a real privilege to help engage and sort of shape the national AI journeys of our allied nations across the world, and also serve in the industry in different capacities as the co-chair of the AI Compute and Climate Task Force at the OECD, and recently appointed to President Biden's National AI Advisory Committee.
Thank you. And then we have Wasim as our last panelist.
Hey, so it's Wasim Bashiri. I'm the founder and CEO of Borza Labs. We're a product research lab that we develop and invest in different products. Thanks for inviting me. I'll be really happy to talk about some of the practical implementations of AI in our products.
All right, thank you. So these are our panelists. As you all know, the topic for today is AI and the impacts on society. Artificial intelligence has changed the world, the way we work, the way we communicate, the way we make decisions in some instances. So the interesting part was, and that's why I want to start with kind of like the definition of what is AI, is that MMC Ventures, investment firm in London, they have actually investigated a lot of European startups and found that 40% who claim to be using AI actually don't. So I want to ask the question to the panelists, what do you define as artificial intelligence?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we could spend the entire panel today on it. I would, so look, there are a lot of technical definitions that probably wouldn't be very useful. What I would just say for me personally, as I myself tried to get my hands around it, I would just say a couple of things. First, AI is math, right? At the end, if you strip it down, you kind of peel the onion. AI is mathematics, and it enables it enables a machine to emulate human-like cognitive function, which is really very key. I mean, this is not the ability to just automate a process, but is to emulate a very specific kind of function, which is human-like cognition. So, for example, it's not just the ability to see an image, but to recognize it. It's not just the ability to duplicate a sound, but to be able to engage in that in a natural language way and so forth. And so there is a threshold where something becomes a human-like cognitive function, and that is, and at an extreme level of mathematics, we have figured out how to do that. And that is, to me, that's how I think about AI. And there's many other definitions. So I'll end it off.
Yeah, that's a great starting point. So the question then is, why do you think many startups or claim to have AI? Is it just like the buzzword, or what gets really interesting about this? Maybe Irina can chime in. I know you have a.
I mean, I will say it's definitely a buzzword by now. And when I was thinking about, defining the term, the first thing that popped into my head is that just a couple of days ago, the head of the Georgetown Privacy Center wrote a blog. They are just not going to use the term AI anymore. They need to be much more specific about what a particular piece of software claims to do in what circumstances. And that just saying AI was sort of throwing, instead of clarifying what we were actually talking about at this point. So I thought that was an interesting sort of inflection point that we're at, that for a while it was, and we're seeing it used all the time. But I think increasingly the people who understand it best are starting to sort of push back against some of the hype around it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and this leads me to my next question. So, I mean, we have talked about how this completely impacts every industry almost. We have Wasim, who now just built an AI product, and I would love Wasim to chime in to talk about his industry and how AI is used in there, and as well as what went into the design process of his product.
Yeah, so I mean, and I think maybe I'll chime in a little bit about the previous question. I think sometimes with startups, a lot of it is aspiration. So you start your product roadmap and your general technology stack, you start somewhere small and controllable, and you grow that. And sometimes part of the vision is, in X amount of time, we want to actually start leveraging AI for a specific purpose. In our case, we had a problem that we're trying to solve, which is we're trying to increase the bandwidth of general doctors in the diagnostic process. So the idea was that we leverage computer vision aided diagnostics to give generally a doctor a lot more bandwidth when they're seeing patients. So in our case, we leverage computer vision to analyze and give about an 80 to 90% accuracy in terms of diagnostics. This is a prediction of what the diagnosis would be. And along the path, it's, you got to start small somewhere. So what you'll see is a lot of the open source models that you'll find out there, and a lot of the data sets that have been, that different AI models have been trained on, might not necessarily fit the use case that you're trying to apply it to. So in that case, you need to actually go and try and find some, figure out a different strategy for your data set development. So in our case, similarly to how you would visit a research hospital or university hospital, sometimes before the actual doctor walks in, you see a student walk in, and they'll probably ask you a few questions here and there. And what they're practically doing is they're actually training on you as a patient. So we're kind of applying the same theory where AI would be able to collect some data up front and provide some prediction around the specific patient case. And by the time the actual doctor sees the patient, that doctor would be able to get, maybe an 80 to 90% accurate prediction around their case. So that's kind of a general idea of how we're applying AI in our specific case. Again, starting small and growing it is definitely a key to success of any implementation.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, you're part of the healthcare industry in a sense, so that has an impact on every single person because we all at some point will have to see a doctor, hopefully not for something major, but still. So, and there's an interesting part you said, starting small and then building up something bigger that AI is learning and, continuing to learn. So big corporates approach AI and view AI, of course, as well, and maybe in a different way because they have more resources. And I specifically want to ask Ashley now about how Microsoft views AI and what you do to kind of regulate it or work with the companies that are interested in building AI with Microsoft.
Yeah, you got a great point. There's a lot of debate today about who has the responsibility for managing the ethics of AI. And to simplify the answer is everybody's got that responsibility. There's activities that we can do as individual consumers. There's activities in the government agencies. There's activities at the corporate level and even local governments. We all have to figure out how we're going to work together to come up with a body of data that allows us to ethically use this new technology. Our society's been through this many times through other technologies, going back to even the telephone. When the telephone was invented, there's a lot of ways to use it inappropriately, and we learned how to standardize, regulate, control, and manage it over time. And history will tell you it will never be perfect. There'll always be something going on with the regulation. So each company, what I think Microsoft kind of looks at it is we're in the position of building a platform that incorporates AI as a platform service that other companies can use to build an AI component to their technology or offer it as a feature in a product they resell to another company. So we've taken the responsibility on our own to create a very inclusive method for managing the way we incorporate it. And not only do we have literally training almost every month at the individual level to remind us on how to operate in this fashion, but I've been involved in a few sales opportunities where we had a company using some development of AI technology, and we literally got them to sign a waiver or sign something to explain that they were going to comply to these levels of ethics when using the technology. And it's not like anybody's trying to do a Big Brother watch case, but it's really about educating. If we can set the standard on how to at least approach the topic, then maybe we can influence other companies and agencies and organizations to do the same thing. Because at the end of the day, there's not enough regulation that exists today that can really do it for the individuals or for the companies. So I feel like it's got to be something done at each level. And each one of us on the panel have got experience where we see some of it doing it successfully and some not so successfully. So it's going to be a journey versus a destination. And I think we all need to be really, present in the moment as we evaluate the true needs, but also be patient as the opportunities for applying standards begins to work its way out. The reason why I say that is you can apply standards too quickly and you can limit the innovation associated with the technology, or you can let it run rampant for too long and it creates a different type of chaos. So there's a happy blend in there that we're learning as we go. And it'll be fun during the course of this conversation to help individuals think about what they can do to participate in this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to add on to what you said before. It said, you mentioned everybody is responsible for how AI is being used and how AI is being trained. So who are those individuals defining like the ethical practices of AI? Is this all of the engineering team? Is this the government? Like, who are these people working on ensuring AI is doing a good job that is, has a positive impact on society? Irina could chime in as well.
Yeah, I don't know that anybody is ensuring that right now, but I will say that the people who are involved in those conversations at this point are, I think, really primarily the researchers, engineers, and data scientists who are building the AI, increasingly AI ethicists, increasingly regulators, definitely in the EU, but in the US as well, context-specific experts, and then people affected in various ways by the technology who are making their voices heard as much as they can. But I think to Ashley's point, that education piece is really vast, and nobody really owns it yet, right? Who's educating the public about exactly what AI is and does? Who is educating the government agencies who are deploying some of these tools? Who's educating the people who are sometimes, again, designing the tools, but not thinking through the particular context in which they're deploying them. So I think that question is really, really important. And I've seen, I can just tell you a personal experience, sitting in the audience one time at a conference, watching a panel which consisted of a bioethicist, a lawyer, and a machine learning researcher talking about AI in the healthcare system. And the bioethicist said that AI was going to be a better diagnostician than the doctors soon, and we had to prepare for this. And the lawyer came and talked about who would have liability for these systems, given that AI was going to replace doctors. And the third person was the machine learning expert who said these systems are brittle right now. They don't translate them. You can use the model and be successful in one data set, and you apply it to another and it doesn't work as effectively. There are so many challenges that need to be addressed in a really nuanced way. And it was kind of a heartbreaking conversation to have, given the first two parts of that panel. So that's where I think we need, as an ethical sort of first base for all of us, is to just cut down the hype and to be really clear about where AI is really beneficial and makes sense, and what are the areas where, if you apply it to try to, predict the risk that somebody will commit a crime, we seem to be failing terribly. That's part of this education that needs to happen.
And part of that, Irina, is, if you'll probably agree with this, is policing your own activity. A really good data scientist will put an algorithm together that they think is going to accurately do something, and it might even get rolled out in a production environment, but you just can't let it go on its own. You have to watch it so closely. It's like a brand new baby learning how to walk. It's like you have to be there the entire time, because as soon as that algorithm breaks, the information can go really wrong really fast. And so you have to be prepared to take action on that, to either pull it out, correct it, adjust it, or do something. And so it's a highly supervised industry is probably the best way to move forward, wouldn't you think?
I think so, but I want to hear you guys who are more in the industry than I am.
Oh, you're muted.
I think that's why panels like these with experts like you they're very important, because getting the word out about exactly how these products are developed is very important. I'll tell you, my point of view. I'm in the trenches, and it's sometimes it's really hard to get access to information that is distilled and that's ready to use. In the case of the cybersecurity world, we have these cybersecurity frameworks that are enforced. that are very, very well recognized worldwide. And I think we're yet to get there in terms of AI. It's, you know, from a practical implementation, you know, you'll be pretty excited. You know, engineers are super excited, product managers are super, they just want to get that rolled out. But, you know, in our case, in our application, you know, we had to actually pause and actually make a U-turn. And okay, did we, for example, check all, you know, the compatibility with our model with different skin tones, right? You know, is that something that's going to actually affect the results that we're getting or not? So that's something that we had to actually go back and really understand. And it was a good kind of reminder for us to, you know, diversity from the ground up is the best way to go about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree. I mean, as you mentioned, you know, it's in the beginning, AI is built by humans. You know, they are building all of the algorithms, and then whatever, you know, grows out of it has that human bias that is ingrained in, you know, different cultures, different personalities. So is there anything the consumer can do to drive impact? You know, if you, let's say, discover, oh, this product that's using AI has categorized me wrong, or it's because I have a different skin color, it couldn't recognize it as well. So is there any consumer driven impact option right now?
There definitely. I don't know if I would say consumer. I would characterize it differently than I would just say individuals can actually have quite a significant impact. There's a researcher in Boston who took it upon herself to challenge the big tech's use of facial recognition algorithm, the commercialization of facial recognition algorithms, and she very, as an individual, as a scientist, you took it upon herself to develop the tests to prove that there was a patent bias in these models, and that there was a real challenge that people of color were simply not being recognized accurately and effectively through these widely promoted, widely commercialized models. And quite frankly, very, very large companies, I'm not going to mention them, but, you know, very large companies that have, you know, with trillion plus valuations found themselves really needing to pull back and to essentially to stop the sale, not completely stop the sale of these systems, but to limit them. For example, in the cases of law enforcement, there became sort of an emergent agreement that, you know, we will pause the sale of this technology to law enforcement until we can be more confident in the balance, the use of this. And it all started with a single person who did some research and published it and promoted it and stuck by it and wouldn't let it go. And so I think individuals can actually have a big impact on this today, because obviously we live in this incredibly liquid world where information and we all have a podium, we all have a microphone, anyone can sort of, you know, publish and tweet. That's not always a good thing. I get that's not always, we don't know that there's downsides to that, but our ideas can get out. So I think the average consumer, you know, and the average individual can absolutely influenced this industry in a way that probably was not true decades ago of other industries where your voice, you know, couldn't be heard. So that's just one anecdote I throw out.
So just to throw the name out, I believe you're referring to Joy Buolamwini, who was at the time at MIT. Yes. And by the way, for everybody in the audience, if you haven't seen, you can Google her AI Ain't I a Woman 5-minute video. Ain't I a Woman is the famous question asked by Sojourner Truth, you know, the African-American icon. And Joy Buolamwini basically made this video to show that AI claimed to be able to recognize faces as being women's faces or men's faces, but not for African-Americans. Yeah. It just kept failing miserably. So it was one of those examples that I think you're absolutely right, Keith. I think it changed an industry. I think the other kinds of individuals who have a big impact are journalists, because we've seen several articles that point out some of the failures of AI, but also some of the benefits of AI. And I think those kinds of individuals can have a huge impact.
Yeah, there's another opportunity too in a related industry around consumer data privacy. There's an opportunity where individuals can now start to control how their data is being used by the companies they participate in from a business perspective. And although it's not a direct correlation to artificial intelligence, it's an example of a first step. GDPR has been in the European Union for a few years, and California's recently launched some privacy laws. And at the end of the day, AI is just basically a compilation of data. So if you're feeling like you don't want to participate in that journey, you can now literally go in and request to have your information removed, deleted. You can pull up and request reporting details on who they're sharing it with. So it's what I talk about in the journey. Is it a complete solution? No, but our legal system's not set up to just throw out some type of policy. So the state's introducing these privacy laws. Any of us could right now take action, and that will help contribute to the idea that we are interested. The problem is the consumers right now don't realize they have the freedom to do this. So we it's one of those scenarios where we ask for the right, and then when the right's given to us, we don't act on it. And I fall in that category like everybody else. It's about now that it's available, let's speak up. Let's use those laws in our favor. And if we can push for a law that allows for consumer data privacy rights, maybe we can then push for something around the AI space over the next course of time. So it's a matter of being persistent, but being patient.
Yeah, I agree. And definitely also governments have picked up on this. And I don't know if you're aware, but in 2021, the EU Commission has actually proposed like a regulatory framework on artificial intelligence. It's just like an approach of, to address fundamental rights, safety risks specific to AI systems. And it is a proposal because, again, nobody has the perfect solution to make AI perfect quite yet. Maybe we're going to be there at some point in the future, hopefully. But yeah, we definitely have talked quite a bit about the darker side of AI, what could happen that is, not great for individuals in society. So now I want to switch that around and talk about, what does AI do to have a positive impact on society today? Like, what are some of the products you've been in touch with or services you've been in touch with, companies? Microsoft offers the AI platform. So a lot of, which industries are building AI to make the world a better place for every individual that's living in there? What have been your real life examples?
I've got, right now, my experience is whenever it's machines working with machines, it seems to be where we're seeing the most success with AI. Once we have human intervention, it's still so new, but we're working on that as well. But so in the manufacturing space, having automation of robots working, and robots working besides humans, like the artificial intelligence is getting smart enough where a human and a robot can work together on an assembly line or a production line, and they can maximize the quality, the output, so you get a better product, you get more products, the prices go down, so there's a lot of value in there. And then self-driving cars is one everybody likes to talk about. The autonomous driving space is a huge opportunity there, where the issue there is you've got so many data vectors coming in. If you're a vehicle and you're at a stoplight and you see you got people, you've got the traffic beside you, there's so many data sources coming in. It's like we're learning to teach the vehicles how to be a safer vehicle, and we have seen as a result of that a significant drop in casualties, injuries, and items like that. So as that type of technology becomes more mature, and the nice thing about it is it can be rolled out in slow chunks. Instead of a vehicle taking full responsibility, there's different levels of autonomous driving. So it's a perfect example where we can start to taste the flavor of the benefits without going all the way too soon. Someday soon, on these major freeways that are super straight that goes across the west deserts of the United States, those freeways are perfect for self-driving trucks who can just keep going straight, and there's not that much deviation. So it's going to be huge amounts of value that come as a result of the machine portion of AI. The human element, like everybody's talking about, is where there's a lot of confusion. That's got to get some more work on. So I would say there's a lot of value to be had just in that portion of it. And I'm sure most of you have some other examples as well.
Yeah, one of being at NVIDIA, I mean, it's such a big part of our business today that I mean, I'm just literally overwhelmed with examples. And so I'm just trying to think, where to even to start. I mean, in general, over the last 15 years, the overall field of scientific computing has really merged with artificial intelligence, and certain fields now like astronomy and physics and increasingly medicine and sort of this new sort of age of digital biology, there is the entire trajectory of those fields now are essentially integration between humans and machines, and the ability to use the cutting edge potential of deep learning and so forth. And what the new art of the possible is mind blowing, and it's not about replacing humans or machines better than humans. It's really about the value of those of working together, right? And the value of that technology. But you can't deny that we have achieved a certain level of almost super intelligence in very narrow areas that are very useful to humans. So for example, in the area of disaster response, unfortunately, due to the climate situation, we have a level of flooding and fires that's just hard to get your hands around if you just start reading about it and tracking it. And right here in California is a huge issue. I just saw a headline yesterday which said that in my town of Rancho Santa Margarita in Southern California, the headline was, 100% of the homes, 88,000 homes in Rancho Santa Margarita now have a moderate to severe fire risk. 100%. Every home in the town, is at risk. So we're at this really kind of scary time. But using advanced computing technology and deep learning and satellite imagery and computer vision models and so forth, we're also able now to not just predict fires, but predict the actual behavior of those fires, which can make a very significant impact on the ability to respond to them, to save lives, to prevent damage and so forth. And we're starting to see that being used really across the world, from Australia to California. And so there's just so many examples across so many different scientific fields where there's very real impacts, including, of course, the recent COVID, the current pandemic, I guess, and the value of AI in that. So it's just overwhelming, but I think there's a very powerful case for AI for good and its impact on the world. And of course, you have to think about the ethical boundaries and the downside risks and engineering ethical systems. But at the same time, the upside is pretty tremendous.
So I think both of the examples you guys gave, or several examples, are excellent, and they make an interesting point, which is, Ashley, you talked machine to machines. Keith, you were talking about things like atmospheric data or oceanic data, or these vast data sets that until now we couldn't crunch and sort of mine for patterns, right? I think we need to separate all of that from data about people. Right? Yes. The whole data not about people, I basically only see benefits aside from the potential energy consumption of training large models. We can talk about that too, but otherwise there's so much upside. Once you have data about humans, that's when you really start to talk about both very promising things. So for example, you could say adverse reactions or interactions between drugs. It's very much human related, but it's really about still data about how humans react to these drugs. And that's been one of the cases that everybody mentions as a huge good thing that AI can do, right? To just be able to identify that so people don't have to actually suffer those reactions. When you start to say things like AI is going to be better than us at identifying who we should marry, and I've seen that claim made. The only thing that really comforts me is that AI researchers literally, there's an article in Wired this week debunking that. So I think that's where we have really to be really careful. First of all, separating data about humans from other types of data, and IoT and industrial Internet of Things stuff, fantastic uses of AI. And then in terms of data about humans, being very careful when we start to try to predict things about what human beings will do. That's the most high risk and the one where it's really not working. So I think, again, being nuanced about it, that's why I was sort of reacting to the whole term AI, because it's too broad by now, right? Like we could be having different conversations about use by industry versus use by public agencies, use in national security versus use in proctoring student exams online to try to figure out if they're cheating. The ethics of all of these things are really different, the ethical calculus behind them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Suresh actually asked a great question just now in the chat. He said, aren't we jumping ahead, questioning machines without first establishing how humans actually, right or wrong, make these decisions? And if machines can produce bias, could they also be used to combat bias or counter bias?
Suresh must have been listening into our conversation yesterday as we were having an internal debate, Suresh. And the answer is yes on both fronts. I mean, in fact, the risk management frameworks, the governance models that's emerging around AI, to some degree, is AI to manage AI. I mean, it's the velocity of processing and the level of technology being used. Humans can't monitor it in real time. It's not possible. So humans can set up the boundaries, can write the rules, can set up the frameworks and the checklists, but ultimately you need sort of artificial intelligence to monitor artificial intelligence. But your bigger question, your first question about the humans, we talked about, we debated this a little bit internally about who ultimately is accountable, right? Is it the humans making the decisions on what models to design and what data to use and ultimately how to deploy it, right? I mean, that there's a sequence of human decisions there so ultimately the accountability from a legal perspective sits with the humans, but ultimately is AI morally neutral or not, right? And we were kind of debating that internally.
But in terms of saying, I would push back against the notion that an AI tool can be less biased than humans, because not only, I mean, Nina mentioned that humans design the algorithms, but humans also collect the data on which we are training these models, right? Data is not some naturally occurring substance that oozes out of the ground. Somebody decided to collect certain data for a certain purpose. And so the data reflects human biases. It reflects the societies and all of our biases. And just combining that data with algorithms, the notion, and we've seen this initially, that was the hope that somehow AI was going to be less biased because it was math. But it's math that combines human decision-making in terms of what factors to bake into an algorithm with human decision-making about what data to use and how to use the data for training. So it's not going to have less bias. Where I think it's really interesting is that it can help us identify and demonstrate human biases. So if you get a whole bunch of data sets and you want to show that maybe there's bias in policing in terms of who gets arrested and who doesn't, AI can be extremely helpful.
Yeah.
So you're also saying that technically if the data was collected, let's say in Europe, it differs from data collected in the US or Asia. So you would say if I was to write an AI algorithm, it deploys in the US, it works just fine. If that algorithm is then expanded, let's say into the Chinese market, that it might just break because the data was so focused on this US culture and, taken from people in the US. So is that a concern as well?
Yeah, we've seen that in the criminal justice system when models that were trained in one particular state were applied in a different state and did not work as well. So that's absolutely the case.
Yeah, I mean, the largest language models in the world today, like GPT-3, have essentially been trained on the internet. And what they basically did is unleash these models on all data on the internet. They really didn't. They did not limit the data. They let the models essentially read everything, listen to everything, watch everything that's on the internet. Really, at an unbelievable scale. We're talking trillion parameter models. And and I think the hope, perhaps naively at that time, was, well, if they can look at that much data, there'll be no bias because it'll look at everything. But it didn't turn out that way. The data on, the available public data is implicitly biased in some respects. And by bias, to be clear, it doesn't mean it's racially biased, right? That's not the only context in which something is biased. Bias could mean you think it's a cat, but it's really a muffin. Okay, I mean, there's a lot of bias is not necessarily the same social context in which we think about it, but the data is, the famous saying, all models are wrong, but some are also useful. And I think that the fact is they wanted the world's biggest data set essentially is the internet. So they trained these language models on the internet, but that did lead to some findings. And so now those models have to be curated essentially and moderated by humans to address what turned out to be the bias. But to your point, Irina, also humans pick the data, right? So we pick the data, we design the models, and we design the governance models after those models are originally trained to continuously understand what the value of those outputs. And I think one very clear milestone I think we've achieved in the last few years as an industry, and this is kind of a bright spot, is that going back just 3 years ago, most people just assumed if I built a model and I trained it and I deployed it, it'll be right. I think today there's widespread recognition that that's just not the case. You just can't assume it's right. You do need to have an ongoing continuous ability to test and govern that model. And there's even a handful of really cool companies like Credo, which just raised like 18 million the other day, companies that did not exist just 2 years ago, who are solely focused on that space, providing that overarching sort of governance model for AI that just it wasn't even part of the conversation. So I think there is progress, but it's still early days.
Okay, yeah, so we definitely concluded that AI is somehow human because based on how society is progressing, will also determine how AI is developed and how AI will learn. So looking into the future, what would be the perfect outcome or the perfect next steps that either individuals can take or governments can take to have the ideal outcome of what AI should be? What is your take on that? Or what's the dream?
I think we should continue to prove out the AI models, as we've talked about, in a machine-to-machine environment. The egos that machine have are much less sensitive than human egos, and the retribution associated with the incorrect data on another machine doesn't have near the consequences that it would have on a real human. So there's so much data that could be collected and used. As our technologies become better at computing and we reach a quantum computing level sometime in the future, we're developing these data models now. Believe it or not, as sophisticated as we are in the technology world, the computers still can't process the volume of data fast enough to accurately compute. So the technology continues to improve. Let's test it out in a safe environment that involves machines primarily. And that'll give us time for the technology to continue to evolve. And that'll give us time to address these social issues, which are directly related to the successful use of, or the application of AI around humans.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there was, and it's very important to frame it this way, the responsible use, right, of AI. Is essential to the future of humanity. I believe that, and that's not just because I'm in the industry. I'm also a parent with 3 kids, and I want them to be in a world where our diagnostic accuracy is higher, right? I want them to be in a world where, for example, we talk about cars. Sweden has a national strategy to achieve 0 deaths on the road, in a few years. 0 deaths on the road. And unfortunately, if you pay attention to that statistic in the US, actually, it's gotten worse. After many, many years of declining deaths, it's actually starting to go up now because of driver distraction and so forth. So we're heading in the wrong direction. But things like, artificial intelligence will change that. We will, even way before we have self-driving cars, we will have cars that almost completely prevent death. Because it will be very difficult to have a fatal accident. Maybe not impossible, but it will get much, much harder. The cars will be able to respond and engage and interact in ways that significantly limit the potential for death in a car, and despite driver error, despite weather, despite all these things. And so I think there will be significant contributions to humanity in many very real ways as we figure out how to perfect these technologies and deploy them in responsible ways. And I'm very excited about that, which is why I joined the industry, frankly. And I think most countries agree with that, but that's still, you need boundaries and you need regulation, you need accountability, you need all of that to go hand in hand with the innovation.
Wasim, do you want to talk about your ideal before I go?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we'll end up dealing with all of the above. So, we're going to have to deal with, AI that's being used for good, AI that's being used for bad. And there's a lot of, policing. And as Keith said, the responsible use of AI is going to definitely be the overarching control in this case. But I mean, I think AI is going to be a very mainstream technology, just as we use computers today. Essentially, you'll have, businesses, small businesses, even with an AI assistant that's, helping the small business owner and, their decision making, their purchases, their marketing and so on. So it's going to be a very mainstream line of technology, and it just needs to be governed to some degree by some controls. But it's all of the above for sure.
So I think especially if we see it becoming as pervasive as that, as just sort of something that everybody uses, then I'm going to say I had sort of written up a little list for myself of what I thought of as best practices, but I'm going to reframe that, Lena, since you said what would be sort of my ideal or what should happen. So I'm going to present these as ideals. So what I think would be great if it would happen, and I'm talking now specifically about developers and purveyors of AI rather than users or regulators, et cetera. I would say that the ideal will be that they don't hype, they themselves clarify the limitations of AI and of a particular product in particular. Second, that they identify the right circumstances and problems where AI deployment makes sense, and we've already talked about that some. Third, that they will use relevant, recent, and representative data, and we've talked about that too. That they will involve subject matter experts in the work to make sure that they're not just looking at data points and they really understand the context that they're deploying in. That they will test carefully before deployment and deploy at small scale first, and we've already talked about both of those things. And that they will develop sufficient channels for feedback post-deployment so you can respond, so people can respond to any unanticipated challenges and harms. And we don't have to wait for, journalists to find that something had been going wrong for 3 years before anything is changed. And we've seen those kind of situations, right? So I think, to Ashley's point that all of this stuff is sort of being developed and tested, I think we are at a point now we should really be requiring that we stop testing on the backs of massive numbers of people, and we just test at small scale until we make sure that something works and then deploy it.
Yeah, I guess that's the dream. Yeah, and I have one more. Oh yeah, Suresh just wrote a question again. So the ideal state opinion, so this assumes humans have control. The industrial revolution show the tech will direct our trajectory and impact, and it's unpredictable. So could you ignore current states and look ahead at more advanced states?
I feel like Suresh can, based on the sophistication of his question, he could probably answer it. No one has a crystal ball. It's true. It's very hard to, almost all predictions are wrong, so it's hard to say. I think actually it's what is predictable is that we're going to continue to invest in data, accruing data. We're going to continue to invest in, as a society, in algorithms and data science, and we're going to continue to invest in the infrastructure, the computing and the data centers. Those are kind of the three sort of pillars of AI. And yeah, I think we're going to see a super exponential scale in impact and in the potential for innovation. And I don't think I have a crystal ball on how that'll completely play out. I just feel like that we're having, not just like panels like this are happening all across the world in every language, in every country. People are having the right kinds of dialogues and sharing. And I do feel like we're going to end up in a good place with the technology. So I have no fear on the future of AI and its impact on the world, because these narratives, actually, these dialogues are quite transparent and active. So I can't predict the future, but I feel good about it.
Maybe some AI is actually taking the data of what is currently being spoken about all over the world and hopefully building some great conclusions out of it. Yeah.
I was going to say, I just want to make sure that we do. I think that humans will drive this. That I don't think that sort of the industry or the technology is kind of like a natural wave that takes over and is out of our control. I think we have a role to play in the direction it goes in. And I think in order for that to happen, though, first of all, we need technologists to be involved in government agencies. We need government to be actually advised by technologists, not just hear from people who are selling them services, or not just hear from lawyers who are trying to talk about liability, but to talk to the people who understand how this is all being developed. And I think technologists increasingly, as you've probably figured out from what I've said so far, need to become public speakers. I think some of the most powerful voices are from the people who really understand this technology. And if they don't tell the rest of us, I'm not a techie, so I can't make those points until I really feel like somebody's explained to me how something works and where it works. And so I really rely on the people who are the next wave of researchers and technologists deploying this to tell the rest of us so we can give our input on how all of this is going.
Yeah, and I'd like to jump in on that, on the point you made, because as Keith mentioned, he is working with the Biden administration and to some extent. So I'd love for him to briefly talk about that as well, to see what they're trying to make happen.
Well, I have to be careful because the administration wants people like me to say very clearly that we're not speaking on behalf of the administration, and also that I'm not authorized to even speak on behalf of the committee, even though I'm on the committee. So just being respectful of that boundary. What I will say is that I think what the U.S. is doing is very similar to other governments, which is really trying to bring together the industry. Because of the 27 panel members of the committee, 11 of them are from industry, and so there's a very strong industry representation, and actually a balance between sort of startups like Data Robot and Credo and the bigger companies like Google and NVIDIA and Microsoft. In fact, now that I think about it, Ashley, the Microsoft executive on the panel committee is also named as Ashley. So Ashley Lawrence, yeah, from Microsoft Research.
That's so dangerously close.
Yeah. So, but yeah. So and what's also very, very important is that the statutory charge from the committee, from the Congress to the committee, is to ensure that the U.S. Maintain. What can the U.S. do to ensure it maintains competitiveness? In a sort of this new global digital economy where AI and automation are reshaping everything from the workforce to industries, and at the same time does it in a responsible and inclusive way. And by inclusive, meaning that everyone in the U.S. can participate. In the opportunity from underserved communities and so forth. And so it isn't just about. It isn't just about data science. It's not just about people in the tech sector. It's about rising everyone up. And there's a strong focus on equity in the workforce and making sure that this is a net positive for people, right? Because automation and artificial intelligence will affect jobs, and it will create new jobs as well, change existing jobs. And so we have to be prepared for that. And other countries are. So I think it's a good thing. I think that the committee and more broadly the National AI Office, which is in the White House, it's actually done a very good job of stepping up in the last few years to make sure the U.S. is tracking and focused on these issues. However, just to keep in mind, the U.S. tends to take more of a decentralized approach that is almost private sector led versus government led, which is more typical of Europe, in their general approach. And that's just the way it is. But I do think that we're now leveling up in our policy focus, and this started in the prior administration. It's continuing to this administration. I think it's a good thing for our country.
Okay. No, I mean, it's definitely comforting to hear that these conversations are actively happening and that they continue to happen and that they've also happened in the past. So there was always kind of this knowledge that AI is not perfect, but we're trying to get there.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add one thing on the topic of equity that you mentioned, that there are organizations, I can just name one called AI for All, which are organizations that are dedicated to trying to make sure that underrepresented groups actually become some of the ones who are designing the AI. And they work with high school kids and middle school kids. So I know for anybody in the audience or who's watching this video that they're always looking for mentors. So if you care about that topic, please try to get involved with one of those organizations. I think having that diversity of background and life experience, and both in terms of who's designing the AI and who is regulating the AI, is really important.
And actually, Irina, the CEO of AI for All, is on the committee.
Fantastic. Yep.
Great. I think
so. I do have a prediction to help answer the question.
All right. Go ahead.
The prediction is based on our limitations have been technology based, compute and storage, and Moore's law has been the driving factor associated with our ability to use technology to advance everything we're doing, to include artificial intelligence. So as we move forward, we're having panels today talking about artificial intelligence. Quantum computing is going to be the next step that's going to create massive disruption in the AI model. Because right now, we can't compute fast enough to keep up with the amount of data. And so once we are able to store the data and compute it at a quantum speed, the analysis on that data will happen so fast. To Irina's point, if the data is bad, the results are going to be worse. If the data is good, so we need to get this whole social issue resolved as quickly as possible, because you want to talk about putting guardrails in place for AI. We're going to have guardrails in place on how to use quantum computing responsibly. So if you put quantum computing and AI together without any experience, there are no guardrails. So let's be careful as we move forward on how those two technologies collide in the near future.
All right, thank you, Ashley. I think this was a great closing statement. I really want to thank everyone who has participated in the panel tonight. This was a great conversation. I hope some AI somewhere is going to pick up that conversation and those ideas and make the world a better place. And yeah, thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I second everything Lena said. Fantastic discussion. I truly appreciate your input and your experience and your support. And we will hopefully see you in person at some point.
Yes.
Thank you all. Enjoy your evening and keep on being rock stars.
Thanks for hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.